Jenny, since she became our president, has injected us some new life and spirit, and which we are very happy to have. As Jenny said, I'm Gabriel Campbell, and I assure you that despite wearing this Afghan Pashtun hat, I am not a member of the Taliban, and I am not here. I am just a harmless member of our beautiful Oakmont, or I mean Oakmont. But that was a segue into our talk today. It's a great honor and personal pleasure to introduce our inspiring speaker, Katy Butler, to present her wisdom on the most important issues we all face: how to live a good life and how to prepare for a good death. Katy is a celebrated journalist, author, speaker, and advocate for medical reform. She was also lay adorned by the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. Katy started her writing career at the San Francisco Chronicle, where our symposium board member in the back, Jim Brewer, was one of her first mentors. She has written numerous prize-winning articles that have appeared in our most prestigious periodicals, from the New Yorker to Mother Jones to Scientific American to the New York Times Magazine, to name just a few. Katy was born in South Africa and raised in Oxford, England, and attended Sarah Lawrence College and Wesleyan University in Connecticut. This is where I had the immense pleasure of meeting and becoming close friends with Katy. At the time, I was serving as the student research assistant for her father, Professor Jeffrey Butler, the esteemed African historian who is the central subject of her first award-winning best-selling book, Knocking on Heaven's Door: The Path to a Better Way of Death. I was blessed to have him as my teacher. And I still remember the delight of having English tea served to me by Katy's beautiful mother, Valerie, who is also a central figure in this book. This book and the follow-on practical guide, The Art of Dying Well, which our previous symposium speakers on this topic have all recommended, are available for sale, and Katy's signature at the end of the talk. Thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge and insights with us, Katy. Let us welcome Katy.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, you can. I first just want to thank Jim for, oh, sorry, he's Gabriel. When he was in college, he went by another part of his name, which is Jim. I really want to thank him for bringing me here and for all of you for coming. Events like this are not just attempts to exchange information or give you tips. They're really part of the way that Oakmont builds community. And I understand now that you have, what, dozens or is it hundreds of different affinity groups that help build community. And I think one of the things I learned researching and writing these books is how important community is to help us adapt to the numerous changes and losses, as well as gifts, of this later stage of life. Having a sense of community, being able to build some forms of ritual, whether they're specifically religious or not, all of these things help us adapt to change. So I'm going to begin by just saying this is a little bit of a map of the talk. I'm going to talk about how I came to write these books. I wasn't a medical expert. I wasn't an expert in aging. I was a journalist with a lot of other interests. how did I come to write 2 books and spend really 10 years contemplating the changes of later life? And then hopefully I'll share a little bit about what I learned in the process of researching and also interviewing hundreds of people, both people like you and I who are in later stages of life or who've gone through caregiving, and also medical experts, geriatricians, hospice nurses, a huge range, palliative care doctors, a huge range of people who could help me fill out the landscape of our lives. So first, I want to just wind back the clock to my early 40s. I was living at Thich Nhat Hanh's community in southern France, a meditation community. And every morning with the monks and the nuns, I would recite the following. I am of the nature to grow old. There's nothing I can do to prevent growing old. I am of the nature to get sick. There's nothing I can do to prevent getting sick. And I'm of the nature to die. There's nothing I can do to prevent my death. And everything and everybody I love will eventually be separated from me. And there's nothing I can do to prevent that. And so my deeds are my only companions. And maybe this, I mean, there's a gravity to this, but to me, it's not a sad thing. I think it normalizes the reality that we face. And we live in a culture that is very much oriented toward, go and be young all the time. And it's your fault if anything goes wrong. It's very individualistic culture. So I think these ancient reminders really normalize the fact that we're part of a natural life cycle. It's just been Ash Wednesday, and part of what's recited there is it from dust we come, and to dust we will return. In the Jewish tradition at Rosh Hashanah, there are these beautiful lines of man is like the grass that withers, like a flower that fades, like a fading cloud, yea, even like a dream that vanishes. And again, to me, there's an amazing beauty to these natural images and this reminder that we're part of a life cycle. We grow, we blossom, we may have many late life blossomings. And then eventually we decline and we die. And I think these things are reminders to live fully. I did want to say, Jim was sort of hesitant, like, oh, maybe nobody's going to come because the subject is death and dying. I really want to express that. I'm 74 and I'm probably still in the happiest phase of my life. There's wonderful gifts to this phase of life. And that doesn't also diminish the reality that we also have to adapt to a lot of changes and a lot of losses. And I think of two, there's the Marines motto, which is improvise, adapt, and overcome. And there's another little motto that I think of sometimes, which is awareness, acceptance, adaptation, and action. We have to accept these changes. And then if we have some awareness, we've accepted them, we can adapt. I'm a swimmer now. I used to be a runner. I used to walk 8 miles on Mount Tam all the time, and I would come back energized. And if I even tried it today, first of all, my hips will hurt and I'm using the sticks. But I'll come back exhausted, but I can swim an hour 4 times a week. So there's this substitution that occurs, or that can occur, so that we continue to thrive in the face of changes. So as I said, I was in my early 40s at Plum Village reciting these wise words. And I was at the time temporarily immortal, right? 40. You know, I'm never going to die. And really, these lines went right over my head. And I thought, well, you know, my dad was still teaching and approaching a very active retirement. I was in my 40s. Maybe all these advances of modern medicine are going to give us a pass. And we actually, exceptions will be made in our case. Um, and so, but I think some of it must have entered into my bones. I really do think so. So then, fast forward a decade, I'm in my early 50s, and I get a phone call from my mom, and she's crying. And she was a real stoic, as well as a very beautiful woman. And she's saying, Katy, Jeff's had a stroke. And Jeff was my dad. And my whole family life turned upside down. I'm sure a lot of you have gone through some version of this if you have been a caregiver for ancient parents or worry or think about your own children's roles. And I became a member of the rollerboard generation, the people who always have a rollerboard packed and you're flying out when your parent has a medical crisis and coming back again. So for 7 years, I played that role with my parents, and I became a medical advocate for them. I really helped them with a lot of those decisions. And my father did decline into vascular dementia and repeated strokes. And he finally came to the point where he was saying, I'm living too long. This is a new thing in modern life. You know, previous generations did not have to struggle with something like I'm living too long. And we do struggle with this now because of the very advances in medicine that have actually improved our lives. You know, hip replacements, wonderful, cataract surgery, the best thing that ever happened to me medically. These things improve quality of life, not necessarily extend life, but really improve quality. And we also have now a series of technologies that can extend life without necessarily improving or maintaining its quality. And in my father's case, that was a pacemaker. He got a pacemaker, and pacemakers can be absolutely fabulous technologies that improve quality of life. But in his case, they also prevented him from a natural and merciful death that was appropriate, that was timely. So my mother and I really wondered, why did we lose our voices? Why could we not really discuss this with my father's doctors? And we did eventually ask to have this device deactivated, and we were turned down, which is not ethically right, because we actually all have the right, the constitutional right, to make our own decisions about what medicine we choose to accept and what we choose to reject. But at the time, this was, you know, 2006, 2007, I don't think the conversations had taken place within cardiology that I think have taken place now. So I ended up writing a New York Times Magazine article about these dilemmas and the huge difference between how my father died in this very prolonged way. He eventually did go on hospice and palliative care. And so he had a good final death that was peaceful. But my mom went the 180 degrees the other direction. She refused, she was very Zen-like too, you know, she refused open heart surgery at the age of 84, and she died about 5 months later. She just met her death in a very brave, straightforward way. She's an extraordinary woman. So I wrote this New York Times Magazine story. I was terrified by the response because I thought that they would think my mother and I were horrible and trying to shuffle my father off the earth. And the response was enormous because this is an undiscussed question, but it's under the radar, but people think about it and they talk to each other about it in a very quiet way, I think. And it went viral, as they say. and led to a New York Times, led to a book contract, and I ended up writing these 2 books. So I was on a quest to understand what had happened to us as a family and how how maybe I could move the needle a little bit so that people could have less unnecessary suffering on the way to death. Because we're human beings, we suffer, we all suffer. But my father suffered some unnecessary suffering, and I wanted to do my best to help people not go through that process. And for us, it was a pacemaker. I'm sure a lot of you in this room have had other questions about, could be a feeding tube, could be whether or not to go on dialysis, could be seeing someone through a really prolonged and traumatic death in an intensive care unit. These issues, we grapple with them one way or another. And I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking you have maybe seen examples of things that you don't want to go through. So I wrote these 2 books. So the first one was very much Knocking on Heaven's Door, is very much about love and caregiving and the redemptive quality of the years I got to spend being close to my father, even in his decline. And then I was like, book came out, it was bestseller, it won awards. And then it was like, oh my God, I'm 64. What about me? What is my future going to look like? And how can I be better informed and understand the landscape that I am walking into so that I can thrive, have a great life, enjoy my later life, live a life of comfort, joy, and meaning, even as things change. So I ended up doing a whole lot more research about the various stages of aging life. There's that kind of the 60s where it's kind of young old age and, you're still trucking along. And then, geez, when you hit 70, there's changes. And then there's changes later when you start to acquire all these ologists. You got the neurologist and the nephrologist and and at each of those stages, the decisions you make in relationship to medicine are going to shift because your expectations have to shift. You end up in the ER at 24, and even in the hospital for a week at 24, you're going to bounce back. But as you age, you have to be a lot more cautious and careful about what you say yes to and what you say no to if you want to maintain a high quality of life. So I'm going to read you my little summary of where we got to. I'm going to tell you a few stories from the book. In the years I've spent listening to hundreds of people's stories of good and difficult declines and deaths, I've learned one thing. People who are willing to contemplate their aging, vulnerability, and mortality often live better lives in late old age and illness and experience better deaths than those who don't. They keep shaping lives of comfort, joy, and meaning, even as their bodies decline. They get clear-eyed about the trajectory of their illnesses so they can plan. They regard their doctors as their consultants and not their bosses. They seek out medical allies who help them thrive, even in the face of disappointment and adversity, and they prepare for a good death. They enroll in hospice earlier, and they often feel and function better than those who pursue maximum treatment. They make peace with the coming of death, and they seize the time to forgive, to apologize, and to thank those they love. They rethink the meaning of hope, and they often die with less physical suffering and just as much attention to the sacred as our ancestors did. So all of you in the room today can congratulate yourself because you're willing to come on a Sunday morning take a look at these questions. And I appreciate you being here. And I hope that what I say will empower you as you move forward. Now, I'm going to do a little digression here, which is, I think, other than death itself, what scares people the most is dementia. Am I right? You know, a long dementia trajectory. And so I want to just give you a couple hints of ways to reduce your risk of dementia. So the first is, and I'm sure a lot of you already done this, but ditch things like this, okay? Throw them in the wastebasket. Throw them in the wastebasket. Be comfortable, because the more comfortable you are, the more likely it is you're going to walk, and you do just half an hour a day of reasonable exercise, and you're going to do more for the quality and strength of your brain than anything else you could do. Ditch those like computer programs. And I love crossword puzzles, but crossword puzzles are not going to do as much as a half an hour walk. So let go of vanity and really, really enjoy yourself and find a means of exercise that you really enjoy. And for me now, it's swimming. I just love it, the other is kind of a warning, and I don't think people are aware enough about this. Obviously, I'm not a medical doctor, but this is based on a study at the University of Washington that involved more than 3,000 people and tracking their medical histories for over a decade. It's watch out for these things called anticholinergics, okay? It's a big word. I never heard it before I researched this book, but these are things like Benadryl, okay, Advil Plus, Advil PM, okay, Benadryl, allergy relief, a lot of older comes Somanex, okay, all of these things, Unisom, NyQuil, okay, people who take Benadryl, gone. People who take these on a daily basis have much, much higher risks of dementia than people who use them only occasionally. It's not like you can never leave them, you never use them, but boy, I cleaned out my medicine cabinet after I read this study. So they're the things that make you relax, the things that say do not operate heavy machinery. It's not just over-the-counter drugs. There's also, Flexeril, a lot of sleeping pills. They also are anticholinergics, and you can look them up pretty easily. And you might, if you are on them, you may have to taper off. You may need to be part of a support group. You may need to talk to your doctor about it. But, people get overprescribed at this stage of life, and they even have there's two terms, polypharmacy, and that means being on multiple meds. And doctors are even, they call it de-prescribing, to try to cut down. So, for example, if you develop a new symptom, the first question to ask is, could this be a side effect of some new drug that I was put on? Because you can easily end up in this cascade where you're taking one drug, something else for the side effect, something else for the side effect of the side effect of the side effect. So, okay, so that's my anti-dementia PSA, okay? So now I'm going to go to a few questions. Now, hopefully I'm not going to go, oh God, gotta speed up here. Okay, have a vision, find your tribe, stay in charge, get a map of the future, make a plan, clean house, which I mean emotionally, and bring in the sacred. So, skip through here, get rid of that. Okay. We all are going to hit a point where we have to face our mortality. And one of those little points I just read you is stay in charge. Amy Berman is an amazing woman. She's a nurse and she's also a public policy expert in New York. And when she was in her early 50s, she took a shower and she discovered this rough spot on her breast. It turned out to be inflammatory breast cancer, which is lots of breast cancer, very treatable, even curable, but inflammatory is one of those ones with a very bad forward record. She went to Philadelphia to consult with the top academic expert in her cancer. But the night before the meeting, she got a phone call from her oncologist back in Brooklyn who said, got bad news. The biopsy showed this has already spread to your bone. So this meant it's a stage 4 cancer. Stage 4 cancers are not curable. So I will read you how she stayed in charge. The next morning, Amy told the famous oncologist about her biopsy results. He didn't pause. Here's what we're going to do, he said, plowing ahead with his plan. 6 weeks of intense chemotherapy, followed by surgery to remove her breast, then radiation and another round of chemo. The doctor's aggressive Hail Mary treatment plan would expose her to great suffering, and then she'd bump along for who knew how long in severely damaged health. And for what? Her cancer couldn't be rooted out. She questioned the unspoken assumption that the most harrowing treatment was going to produce the best possible result. There was no conversation, she said. He was an expert in everything except what mattered to me. I thanked him for his time and I left. So in other words, she basically fired him, okay? She fired him. You can fire your doctor and find someone who's more in alignment with your values, somebody you can talk to. Back in Brooklyn, her original oncologist asked a more welcome question. What do you want to accomplish? Amy said she hoped for a Niagara Falls trajectory, to live well for as long as possible, and then plunge over the waterfall to death without undue delay. So that's the Niagara Falls trajectory. This is the one we all want. I'll show you. You know, it's a riot. God, here it is, Niagara Falls. We all want to die this way, right? Okay, it has now been 9 years since Amy got the news of her biopsy and stood weeping with her mother in the rain. She knows her days are numbered and she accepts it. She remains on the top of Niagara Falls. She hasn't, she has done treatments. She's done radiation. She's done an estrogen suppressing pill, but she's stayed away from these major, very, very toxic sort of, burnt landscape type things. She's never spent an afternoon in a recliner while a toxic chemotherapy dripped into her veins. She's never been hospitalized or been too weak to drive or needed a home health aide. She has climbed the Great Wall of China, ridden a jet ski to the base of the Statue of Liberty, and seen her daughter graduate from college and get married. She's made quality of life her priority, and paradoxically, she's outlived many people who opt for more grueling treatments. Most doctors, she said, focus only on length of life. That's not my only metric. So I think this is so significant that her doctor said to her, what do you want to accomplish? In the limited time I have left, how do I want that to go? And what are the trade-offs I'm willing to accept between length of life and quality of life? And we all make these decisions differently. We're all willing to take different risks or gambles or trade-offs. But I think what I'm trying to get across to everybody is it's for you to decide. It's for you to think about. It's for you to talk to the people you love about. And I think often people get kind of stampeded, like my father got stampeded into this pacemaker. Usually, even the worst of our late life diagnoses, they're not usually fast moving. You've got a week or two to talk to a social worker, to talk to your family, to sort of let the news sink in before you make these decisions, rather than to be rushed into, I'm going to get surgery right away, or we're going to start chemo tomorrow. So take a little time, So she obviously has had amazing good luck. And I wouldn't want to tell her story with some kind of implied promise that if you do palliative care or you don't do this or you don't do that, you're necessarily going to get the kind of significant good time that she got. But a lot of people do actually, especially, well, I'm not going to go into all the details of cancer or this or that, but people do often get some very good time. And one of the ironies is that sometimes people who go on hospice and they've got like maybe people think they're going to live another 2.5 months, and they totally outlive the diagnosis because they're now getting home health care, they're getting their spiritual needs addressed, the family's emotional needs are being addressed. So it's ironic sometimes what can occur. But we will all get that moment where we really understand that we're approaching the end of our life and that our time is limited. And I just want to encourage everybody to pay attention to their emotional legacy as well as to whatever financial or other legacy you might think of. A lot of us hope we're going to leave money to our kids or grandkids, but your emotional legacy is at least as important. You don't want to leave siblings in the next generation squabbling over should we have put mom in intensive care or given her a feeding tube. I've heard so many stories of siblings who remain at war after a death because there was an unclarity about what the parent wanted. And so I really encourage you. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard this a million times, but 5 Wishes is a really wonderful, what's it called? A advanced directive. It's got you can find it online. It's $5 online. I'm not paid a commission. Okay. It's the language is really simple and user friendly. It's not intimidating like a lot of these very legalistic advanced directives. So take a look at it if you have been really having trouble getting over the hump and actually filling something out. And it includes things like, I'd like to be massaged, or this is the music I'd like to have if I'm in my dying process, or these are the people I'd like to have around me, or even this is somebody I don't want anywhere near my deathbed, So I just really encourage you, obviously not only to write about it, but also to talk about it to whether it's your children, your spouse, whoever is going to make your decisions. So do not underestimate the power of your emotional legacy. Kathy Doobie was raised on the East Coast by a violent alcoholic mother. She had no memory of ever hearing her mother say, "I love you." Kathy eventually moved to California, but the two women's relationship continued to be marked by bitterness, distrust, and estrangement. When Kathy was in her 40s, her mother developed breast cancer. A little more than a week before her death, she was admitted to the hospital. Over the phone, she told Kathy, "Don't come. I don't want to see you." Kathy got on the plane anyway, on the advice of a friend who told her that if she didn't go, she would regret it for the rest of her life. Kathy walked into her mother's hospital room. There, she found a tiny figure curled up in bed, shrunken, yellow, bald, bronzed by jaundice, as she later described it in a poem. This was the mother she had feared for so long. The two women looked at each other in silence. Kathy's mother said aloud, for the first time that Kathy could remember, "I love you. I'm sorry." That was it. Kathy replied, "I love you, and I'm sorry." Those few moments, said Kathy, cleared up a lifetime of misunderstanding each other. So what I love about these hospice the emotional tasks, thank you, I love you, please forgive me, I forgive you, and goodbye. I mean, that's how you create your emotional legacy. And the wonderful thing is, you don't have to wait till someone is on the deathbed to do all of those except goodbye. Thank you, I love you, please forgive me, I forgive you. And I just think it's a wonderful practice, and try it out even in small things. I really find that apologizing has turned out not to be as difficult or humiliating as I once thought it would be. So another thing I mentioned was bringing in the sacred. Again, we live in a very secular culture. But I think we're also finding, you guys, I'm sure many of you were here for Rumi's Caravan with Doug von Koss, who's here today and is actually in this book, several places. There's lots of ways to bring the sacred in, or a sense of peace, even in, for example, a hospital death. In the book, I talked about a group of friends, and a guy was dying quite unexpectedly in ICU. He had something like a major stroke. And, the ICU is a terribly technological environment, but his friends gathered. They got him moved to a slightly better room with natural light onto a courtyard. And they put together what do you call it? Like a mixtape, a series of songs from his little iPad that he loved. And so they actually created a ritual where they all put their hands on him and had music he loved playing when they went through the ritual of him getting disengaged from all of this technology. So don't be afraid to ask, bring in flowers or photographs, bring in those little LED candles. They can create a beautiful sense of the sacred. Obviously, a lot of people hope to die at home. And if you have a plan and you are on hospice or palliative care, you have a lot better chance of dying at home. So finally, I'm going to share a ritual which was created by some oncology nurses at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. And they had they would get to know their patients really well, because these were people who often had long courses and were in and out of the hospital over time. And there'd been some change in the hospital protocol, so that instead of there being a respectful removal of the body by a funeral home, they were now getting kind of zipped into body bags and shoved out by an orderly. And it was very disturbing to these nurses. So they created their own ritual, which is a secular ritual. I want to share it with you. It's my sort of closing before we do a Q&A. And what I love about it is you can adapt it for your own use. It's in the book. And so you can just photocopy that page. And also, when I've given talks, a lot of times people will remember a death that didn't go the way they hoped it would, that didn't have this sense of acknowledgement and ritual and acceptance. And they'll actually close their eyes as I'm reading this, and they will reimagine how that death could have gone, or how the ending of this could have gone. And they find great relief in it. So I want to share that with you. So, after washing and dressing the dead in clothes from home or a clean gown, the nurses encourage relatives and friends to anoint the body with lavender oil. The physicality seems to be very helpful, said Beth Combs, who's one of these three nurses. I have a theory that after witnessing a death, we go into shock and our minds become numb and chaotic. When we start bathing and touching our loved ones, our bodies understand what our minds cannot. I just think that's so beautiful. Our bodies understand what our minds cannot. Here is an adapted version of their ceremony for your use. As the hair is anointed with oil, a nurse or family member recites, "We honor Jane's hair that the wind has played with." Next, a dab of oil is gently rubbed on the brow as someone says, "We honor Jane's brow, the birthplace of her thoughts." In each succeeding sentence, the name of the dead person is inserted in the appropriate place. We honor John's eyes that have looked on us with love and viewed the beauty of the earth. We honor your nostrils, the gateway of breath. We honor your ears that listened for our voices. We honor your lips that have spoken truth. We honor your shoulders that have borne burdens and strength. We honor your heart that has loved us. We honor your arms that have embraced us. We honor your hands that have held our hands and done so many things in this life. We honor your legs that carried you into new places of challenge. We honor your feet that walked your own path through this life. We give thanks to the gifts you have given us in our lifetime. We give thanks for the memories that we created together. We have been honored to be part of your life. I just, ooh. And what's really touching to me is that I started a group on Facebook called Slow Medicine, which you're all welcome to join. It's confidential, it's closed. And people share a lot of dilemmas and, caregiving issues. And these nurses, one of these nurses joined that group. And through that group, she shared that ritual with me. And then I got to put it in a book, and now I get to share it with you. So it's like this gift keeps moving through the universe, and hopefully there's something I said that you'll be able to take away with you that will be a gift to the people that you encounter in your life as you go through whatever the various changes and losses and rewards are of this stage of our lives. So thank you so much, and really appreciate the chance to be here with you. And now let's do Q&A. Let's do some questions, because there's so much knowledge and wisdom out in this room. You all have something to offer me as well as vice versa. So, yeah.
Thank you, Katy. We honor you in sharing with us such an important part of our life. And we have two mics, so raise your hand and we'll get them to you.
I'd like to ask a question myself, Gabriel. First, let me remind people that we have a club here in Oakmont called Cafe Mortel. It meets once a month. There's information about it on the website, and they discuss good life, good death, and options, which leads to my question. Do you have an opinion or information about the California option to the right to choose your ending?
Yeah, timing. The timing of your death. Yeah, it's legal now in California. It's legal in, I think, at least 17 other states in the country. It's fairly closely regulated, but if you are within the last 6 months of life, you can apply to get terminating medications, which will allow you to time your death. It's not like I hate the term physician-assisted suicide. It's not suicide. It's a very different thing. But this has been going on under the table forever, for decades. I know stories from friends whose grandmother opted to time her death in the 50s. So my opinion is I'm really glad it's legal, and there are some diagnoses for which I personally would probably want to opt for doing that. But I also think it's two things are important. One is a political thing and one is a sacred thing, which is an end of life death like this can be as sacred as any other death. And you can plan, maybe even easier, you can plan ritual into this process. I actually did help a friend who had end stage Parkinson's, not to end his life, but to go through some rituals that are also from the book the day or two before he opted to make that choice to take the medication, and to create sacredness and acknowledgement of what's being done. The other objection I have is political, which is that this shouldn't get us off the hook as a culture to provide better end-of-life care, more caregiving, more state-paid caregiving, more state relief for people who are caregivers, better palliative care, earlier palliative care. It shouldn't be a way of saving money and getting rid of the inconvenience of how long it takes people to die. So even though I'm very glad it's legalized, that's my one caution about it, Yeah.
Thank you, Katy, for coming. This has been very informative. Do you have any opinion about CBD and how that helps people who are going through this?
I don't really, I'm glad you brought it up. And I'm sure a lot of people are getting relief. I don't have any direct experience myself yet, but I think, I don't know, I'm a child of the 60s. What can I say? I'm really very curious about the rebirth of this interest in psychedelics, and obviously things like CBD that are, as far as we know, have a lot fewer side effects than a lot of the heavier pharmaceutical drugs that people are using. I have a couple of little sort of mottos, and one is first do the most for yourself, what requires the most from you and the least from medicine. So instead of taking a drug that you put in your body, maybe you need light, tight blinds in your bedroom so that you can sleep better, or you need earplugs, or you need whatever you need, to work kind of from the outside in rather than from the inside out. So how did I get lost here? Yeah, and also you take the lowest effective dose of the medication with the fewest side effects. So, yeah.
I wanted to say something about the 5 wishes.
Mhm.
My husband and I filled that out maybe 15 years ago, so this may have changed. But when he was rushed to the hospital and I took that with me, they wouldn't accept it because we had not dated and signed it every year. And so it was too old. Thank God I had my power of attorney for healthcare with me. So what I've done is I still have it because it explains a lot, but I filled out the state's advanced
Thank you.
directive form.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think filling these forms out is really important, especially for clarifying things in the family. But the unfortunate reality on the ground is that doctors regard them as suggestions rather than ironclad contracts. And it's unfortunate because, we would like to believe they will necessarily be followed, but you need to be prepared. But it helps to have one, I think it helps a lot. And especially so you don't have conflict in the family, and the family says, I really know what mom wanted, Yeah.
In the back. I don't want to steal the thunder from your books, but there's a book that's really been helpful for my family, and I
Yeah.
want to know if you're familiar with it and if you can comment on Being Mortal by Atul
Oh, yeah.
Gawande.
Yeah. I think it's a fabulous book, Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, who is an MD. And I think one of the most searing and powerful parts of that book is where he goes through the death of a young woman who has a child and has cancer, and really he fesses up on how difficult it was for him and the other doctors to have the conversations that really should have taken place and never did. So it also gives me some empathy for what it's like on the other side of the fence, because they're so poorly educated on how to have meaningful conversations about when people's greatest hopes are going to be crushed, cannot be met. So it's a great book.
Question back here.
Yeah,
Thanks
mine's
for,
better though.
I have a question about your personal evolution. As a reporter who
Yeah.
often was asking the questions and has the notebook and the recorder, you seem to have made a seamless and wonderful transition into the teacher who is now dispensing wisdom. Can you talk a little bit about your professional transition from?
Wow, what an interesting question. Thank you. I don't know. It's like well, first of all, I had this sort of parallel Buddhist life going on. Even when I was working at the Chronicle, I was often on the evening shift from 2 to 10, and I would take my lunch break and I'd go to San Francisco Zen Center and sit for 45 minutes and then come back. So I always had this kind of secret, more radical, more misfitty life than the conventional reporter. So I think that served me in good stead. And then when this crisis happened with my dad, I thought it was ruining my career. My income dropped in half. I was already a freelancer, and my income dropped in half because I was preoccupied and I was back and forth. And I was, very invested and deeply in love with my dad. And then it's sort of, it's one of those spiritual paradoxes. It turned out to be the best thing probably for me personally and also for my career. And so I made that shift into books. And then, newspapers are very limited in how you can speak about anything. And then magazines are a little more expansive, and you can have more opinion, more poetry, and then books are more expansive still, and you can really say pretty much whatever you want. And I think I really was driven by, maybe I always have been, I think I always was driven by, I wrote a lot about AIDS during the early AIDS crisis, driven by the hope that my writing could enlarge people's sense of compassion. And I think, again, with these books, it's more been the motivation of how do we move the needle in this country so that the end of life doesn't have to be so painful an experience. And even if I can move that needle just a little bit, I want to do it. It's worth it to do it, So I think the intention became clearer over time, still that way. Yeah.
Katy,
Yeah,
early on,
Doug.
early on when you were at Thich Nhat Hanh's community,
Mhm.
and the thoughts that you said every day, could we hear them again?
Oh, sure.
They're pure gold.
Thank you. I am of the nature to grow old. There's nothing I can do to prevent growing old. I am of the nature to get sick. There's nothing I can do to prevent getting sick. I am of the nature to die. There's nothing I can do to prevent my death. Everything and everyone that I love will eventually be separated from me. There's nothing I can do to prevent this. And then the final is, my deeds are my only companions. They are the ground on which I stand. Great. I think this is a good time to stop, and thank you. And I'm going to be signing books and selling books in the back. And
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect ending. Thank you, Katy. Thank you, Doug. And Katy's wonderful husband, Brian, will be helping in selling her book, which she has